Alright guys, Murph's here. And today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do a range breakdown and analysis of the footage from my most recent competition. Now, why are we doing it on this one specifically? Well, I posed a little personal challenge to myself. I recently picked up this Heckler & Koch USP 45 compact at one of my favorite local gun shops. And, well, I had a series of unfortunate events. So it started off with I got delayed on my background check, which happens on occasion. About every other gun purchase, I get delayed on a background check. I've more or less just come to live with it over the years. So that set me back about a week and, a missed opportunity for a range trip with this gun. Then, last weekend, I didn't get a chance to go shooting, much to my chagrin, so that, once again, set me back with not being able to shoot this gun. Well, it got to this weekend, which is the weekend of the shooting competition, and a buddy of mine mentioned to me that perhaps it would be interesting if I ran this gun with no prior experience to having ever shot it in competition. Well, at first I rejected the idea as being very silly, but the more I thought about it, the more it began to kind of pique my interest. Now, in addition to that, in the time that I waited for this gun, to be able to get my background check back so I could purchase it and then actually get the time to come out to the range, I picked up a couple of things. So for me, and any handgun, I require a minimum of 3 magazines. This came with 2 single stack 8-round magazines. Well, I ordered a third magazine from HK Parts, which is the 10-round Elephant's Foot Extendo magazine for the USP 45 compact. So now I had 3 magazines. Now, in addition to that, in any of the competitions I've shot with these guys, we have not done more than 24 rounds in a single stage. Well, with 2 single stack 8-rounders and a 10-rounder, that puts me at 26 rounds. I could actually shoot our worst case scenario for these competitions with that number of magazines. Then add in that I got new mag pouches to put on my work belt, so these taco mag pouches were able to come back home with me. And then I also added this Tagua, or Tagua, however it is that you say it, leather inside the waistband belt for a USP 45 compact. I suddenly came to the realization that I was all out of excuses for why I couldn't run this gun in competition. So that's what I did. Now, my buddy decided that before this particular competition, he wanted to hit the range beforehand and get a little bit of a warm-up in, which normally I'm not a big fan of warm-ups, my personal observation being that if you can't do it cold, then you can't do it at all. However, since I had not shot this gun, it did make sense to put a couple of rounds through it to make sure it worked before I looked really silly on the firing line. So I ran a box of ammunition through it beforehand to functions check and make sure that everything was more or less going well. I did kind of grant myself a little bit of a warm-up. So why don't we go ahead and we'll have Murph from earlier this morning talk us through Murph from yesterday's performance on the practice line. All right, draw's pretty clean. Double action first round hit, that's a good start. But no slide lock. All right, despite that, magazine change looks good. Move to cover. Probably stand to slow down a little bit here and really ride that sight. Ooh, but slide lock. And a pretty good mag change, even with the fishing around for it. Ooh, malfunction. All right, let's kick it back to current Murph and talk about that malfunction. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and talk about a couple of things that we uncovered during my 50-round warm-up session. So, first off, slide lock. Now, you'll notice that first magazine there, I did not go into slide lock. Then the ones after that, I did. And it's troubling to me for 2 reasons. One, when I initially got this gun, I was actually somewhat afraid that with a thumbs forward grip, I would run the risk of activating the slide lock. But what's more troubling to me is that it's not been consistent. which if I'm being consistent in my grip placement, then I should be consistently either functioning or not functioning the slide lock. So that's something I've got to spend a little bit more time working on with this particular gun, making sure that I have that consistency in how I build my grip, and then figure out how to adjust my grip from there. But when you consider that, you know, I was thinking originally that I would maybe peel my thumb a little bit off the slide to see if that would help if I had any slide lock issues, but all that stuff always goes out the window. If you see my SIG P226 double action Kellerman video, which I can throw that link in the description too, excuse me. You know, you look at that, as soon as I put on just even the smallest amount of pressure on myself, I go back to that thumbs forward grip, that aggressive thumbs forward grip that, you know, causes me to not have slide lock. So that should be the issue I'm having with this gun, and it's not. So that's something I need to take a pretty in-depth look at. Mag changes, however, were extremely positive and very smooth, and that was surprising because the HK has this really small lever built into the trigger guard for magazine release, which is actually pretty common with a lot of German firearms, whereas, you know, we as Americans, we like our push button. Now, it's ambidextrous. You can hit that with your thumb, but you have to really readjust your grip to be able to do it. So the most common thing you hear people say is to come back and hit the release with your trigger finger. And I thought for sure if there was anything that was going to throw me for a loop, it would be this. I would want to immediately go back to how I would normally release it on like a Glock or something like that. Not the case here. I seamlessly transitioned into using this magazine release pretty much the whole time, which was pretty cool. I actually really, I'm very happy with that from you know, looking at Murph type of aspect, that I was able to switch between those two methods so easily. Now, I mentioned that malfunction there at the end of that little scene. It was not an actual malfunction. I treated it like one. I racked that round out of the chamber and went back to my engagement. However, it was not an actual malfunction. What happens with this gun is, and I'm going to try to get this close to the mic so you guys can hear it. You hear that? That is not reset. It feels like reset on your finger, but it's not. Now you come off of it, and then you're back on reset. You let it travel an eighth of an inch further, you're on reset. But when you initially let it out, you may mistake that little tiny click for the reset and try to run through it and wind up with a dead trigger. That's what I did. Now, I play with it some more. It's definitely there. I have noticed that once you hit it the first time, as soon as you come, like you let it out to that first little tiny click, and then you attempt to fire, and of course it's a dead trigger. As soon as you come off of that, it seems to engage the reset, and then you're good to go. But it is a little bit of a feat, and if you just allow your finger to go past that initial click all the way to the actual reset, it works that much better. I hope that wasn't terribly confusing. It's very hard to describe. It's almost something you have to experience. But to put it very simply, it has a false reset, potentially. Now, I don't ever notice that I ride reset until I run into a gun like this that has the possibility for a false reset or has a weird reset. In my Browning high power, it has a very long reset. You have to let the trigger out really far, a lot further than you would think you would, and I a lot of times wind up short stroking that and winding up with a dead trigger until I release that trigger all the way. Seems like this might fall into a similar category. Now, it's trainable, and it's something that I immediately filed away in my mind as like crucial data for what I was about to do in the competition. But, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, that might have been a bit of a downfall. Now, let's go ahead and let's hop over to the competition itself. Now, before I got to the competition, I did have a failure on one of my mag pouches, so I had to switch over to running the 10-round extended out of the mag pouch built into my Vertex concealed carry pants. I've got to say that I actually really love this magazine. As much as I think that elephant's foot looks really stupid and it's very obtrusive, it makes it really easy to grab up this magazine and feed it into the mag well. On a gun that is already surprisingly easy to reload. Like, I really thought, when you consider that this magazine well is not flared or anything like that, that I would have a lot of issue hitting it. And actually, it's extremely natural. It is incredibly easy to feed magazines back up in this, which is a huge miss for Glocks, because like I seem to have the hardest time hitting a Glock mag well quickly. I've generally got to kind of slow down for a second and manufacture a couple, or like build a couple of touch points in my mind to make sure that I orient a Glock magazine into the mag well perfectly. This gun, not a problem. And lockup's extremely positive and all that kind of stuff. It's very easy to reload. Now, for our first stage of the actual shooting competition, something to keep in mind on all this, I was the first guy up on all the stages, which makes it really difficult to stage plan because you don't get to watch somebody else's failed plan. So, and also I had the least amount of time out of anybody after stage description, like the least amount of time between stage explanation and then running the stage to actually do stage planning. So, you know, oops, but hey, it happens. So the first one was a very simple exercise. It was 3 targets. They were widely spaced. The left and the right target were behind cover. You sat in your gator. You had your handgun on the seat next to you, loaded, ready to go, and then you came up and engaged your targets, starting with the center and then taking out the left and the right. And our only other instructions were don't shoot the gator. So why don't we go ahead and have Past Murph talk about even more Past Murph's performance. All right, little issue with the safety. 2 center mass hits. 1 A zone, 1 a little wide. Good movement across the seat. 2 kind of wide hits. Let's kick it back to Murph. All right, guys. Well, so that stage went extremely well. I guess it was 9 seconds overall. You'll notice that at first I kind of wind up playing around with the gun a little bit before I get to actually shooting, and a lot of that had to do with this safety. Now, this is a very wide gun, very much so wide and fat. It's a 45 compact, it should be. And coming off of a flat seat, it actually kind of threw me off a little bit to start building my grip and getting this thing oriented to actually get into the fight. Coming out of a holster, it's not been nearly as much of an issue, but coming off of a flat seat, it was a bit of a problem. Now, you'll also notice that it took me a little bit longer to manipulate the safety. This is a version 1 USP, which means that it has the right-hand accessible safety decocker. Now, someone might say, why are you running a safety on a double action gun? And I see what you're saying. I 100% don't disagree with you. However, for me, the decision that I've made is that if a gun has a safety, I'm going to run the safety. And it's for 2 reasons. One, if I'm ever out carrying this gun and I draw it and I have this happen because the safety's on, to me that's disastrous. That's an issue. So that's why I train to use safeties on guns with safeties, so that I make sure that it's muscle memory to switch them off, so that as soon as it comes out and it's time to go to work, it's time to go to work, instead of either having a dead trigger and then performing immediate action just to have it still not work because your immediate action doesn't cover safety, or being literally just a heartbeat behind in a gunfight and getting killed with my gun unsafe. That sounds terrible. Now, someone might say, well, why don't you just train it as part of your draw stroke to sweep the safety to make sure that it's off? Well, at that point, why wouldn't I just have it on anyway? That's what makes sense to me. I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong in this case. I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it. I'm just saying that for me, I might as well have the safety on because I'm going to wind up sweeping it anyway in my draw stroke to make sure that the gun's going to go bang when I want it to go bang. That is how I have split that in my mind in order to make this work. Now, my first 2 shots were right on top of each other in the A zone, but the left and the right targets were really difficult in that regard. Now, keep in mind the A zone on these is the only place that you can hit and not incur extra time. B zone's like 3 seconds and C zone is like 5 seconds. So it's kind of steep to not hit A. Now, the problem with A is that it's an 8x3 rectangle, and then those left and right targets had that 8x3 partially obscured. So my movement across the seat was pretty good application of my core and all that, really stretching out my legs to make that movement efficient. And I did manage to get one solid A zone, a little low, but a solid A zone on the right target, but my second shot went wide. And then when I transitioned over to the right, I was at a major disadvantage because about the same amount of the target was obscured, but now we're talking about a game of angles and inches. So trying to line up a right-handed shooter on that left target with the obscuring object on the target's left. You know what? I can go ahead and plug the video back in right now for you guys to take a closer look. Son of a bitch. So that target engagement on that left side was extremely difficult for a right-handed shooter. I had considered perhaps maybe earning back a couple of inches by switching over to left-handed, but when you consider that at that point all I had through this gun was 50 rounds, I didn't feel comfortable trying to do weak hand shooting with it and thinking that that would come out to a positive result. So I went ahead and sent 2 rounds strong side, and both of them wound up going wide of A. But they were impacts, so I had that much going for me. Now, the next stage I actually did not get any video of, which is unfortunate, but we can still talk about some of the key things there. And that was, so that stage was actually built in my honor, since on the last competition I took some bullet fragment to my arm. There's actually a video on that out as well. I'll put that in my description. But so you're supposed to come through the door, engage a couple of targets, put a tourniquet on your strong arm, or your strong side shooting arm, and then transition over to your left hand to finish out some actually fairly long range engagement targets for a pistol. One target was at 21 feet, the other was at like 30, and were partially obscured. And you're doing that with your support hand, one-handed. That was a tough shot. That was a pretty tough shot, especially when I'm still learning this gun. So I actually wound up sinking 2 rounds into a no-shoot target, and that's like 10 seconds each. So I really screwed up on that particular target. Now, the third stage I did get some footage of. Now that one, it was 3 different bays of targets right next to each other with 2 different colors of targets inside. One set of targets was marked orange, the other was marked pink. And you were told, right when time started, the RSO would tell you which color you were engaging. So it really already made stage planning extremely difficult, and that's unfortunate because with how the targets were all clustered, if you didn't have good stage planning, you could potentially find yourself in a shoot-through type scenario onto a no-shoot target, which would be a pretty terrible time detriment. Now, I actually got to help set up this one because the guy just initially kind of threw them out there, and a couple of his targets were set up in such a way that you could literally shoot clean through and hit the other target of the same color, only having to engage one target, but getting 2 impacts, 2 targets engaged because of it. So I rearranged a lot of that stuff, and I set it up so that you would have to really plan how you were going to not have a pass-through onto a no-shoot, but then also thread the needle through no-shoots in order to be able to hit A-zones. Or decide that you're going to go after headshots. Either way. But that was how I kind of complicated that issue. And I actually made that entirely too hard, and that kind of screwed myself a little bit there. But let's go ahead and see past Murph's results. All right, so RSO called out the color. I've started the engagement. This was very heavy emphasis on making sure you don't have pass-throughs on the no-shoot targets. No slide lock there, so mag change looks good otherwise. This was extremely thin. I'm supposed to be engaging only the orange targets and making sure I don't run over into those pinks there. Slide lock on that one. Mag change looks good. And a lot of back and forth, making sure that I can try to get those A zones without hitting anything else. Let's head back to Murph and see what he has to say. So on that target, you will have noticed, or on those targets, you will have noticed that I did have one time where the slide did not lock back, but everything else was good. My magazine changes looked good. I did wind up hitting a couple of no-shoots, but everyone, I think I hit one, but everyone hit at least one no-shoot on that stage. There was the number of angles and not being able to pre-plan just really made that extremely difficult to be able to shoot that completely clean. However, I do want to take the time to kind of talk about the recoil of this gun. Now, this is a 45, and generally I characterize 45 recoil as being kind of a push. 40 cal is what I generally describe, and pretty much everything as being snappy, and then small guns and your normal pistol calibers a lot of times are very snappy, but that's just because there's less mass to be able to diffuse energy over. This gun is actually surprisingly snappy. Now, the USP is touted as having recoil reduction system built in. However, the 45 Compact had to take a different approach to the recoil buffer system. I'm actually pretty sure all the Compacts did, but don't quote me on it. So this one has a plastic buffer that runs over top of the recoil spring. And the whole idea was supposed to be to cut down on the recoil. This is a fairly lightweight polymer gun. I've got to say that I would characterize this gun's recoil as being that of a 40. Now, it's not that it's unbearable. It's controllable. You can work around it. But it is surprisingly snappy for a 45. Now, is that a detriment to shooting? Not necessarily, unless you're doing one-handed support side shooting, in which case maybe it's a little bit of an issue. But I will tell you that the 2 rounds that I put in the previous stage, the one I don't have video for, the 2 rounds that I put into that no-shoot were like stacked on top of each other. So it was pretty good hits, just in the wrong place. Now the final stage, I do not have any footage of. So, again, I forgot to hand off my phone, but we started out, you're supposed to come out of like a bedroom into a hallway, engage 2 targets. One was partially obscured by a no-shoot, and then you're supposed to move into a past another barrier where there were 2 more targets at right around 3 feet. You're supposed to engage also one partially obscured by a no-shoot, and then grab a CLS bag, which was supposed to be your baby, move the baby out of danger, and then finish up with engaging about 5 more targets. So on that one, something that I thought was my issue the entire time really came to light. So I engaged the first 2 targets in the hallway, right? And then I moved past the barrier into baby's room, and I engaged those 2 targets at roughly 3 feet. The second target was partially obscured by a no-shoot running across the vast majority of the A-zone, so I went for the headshot. And I fired 2 rounds, and only 1 hit the head at 3 feet. That's abysmal. I'm actually ashamed to even mention it, and I'm kind of glad that there's no video evidence of it, but I will be so honest as to talk about my own mistakes here. That one was pretty bad. So what I think the issue was is that I was overcompensating for the reset issue. So instead of, normal shooting, when I would fire and then ride that reset out, I was fully releasing the trigger and then coming back on it and slapping the trigger for my follow-up shots. And that's what was causing my second shots to go so wide. Even in the last stage that I did have footage for, with all the targets and the different colors and stuff, even that stage, if you kept your shot groups nice and tight, you could run center line of everything and not hit something else. You might have to change your angles a little bit in our game of angles and inches. You might have to play around with that a little bit, but you could hit A-zones as long as you kept a nice tight shot group. I should have been able to pull that off. Now that's not the gun, that's me. I need to get over this reset issue, and I need to start really focusing on my trigger control and all that kind of stuff, and stop being lazy and going for the slap. Because when it came to realigning sights and all that kind of stuff, I was doing right. I was doing a good job of making sure that I was back on target, but that slap, that's entirely too much last minute movement for no good reason. Incorporating with movement and all that kind of stuff, that's wasted effort, and I got to stop that. Now, having said that, anyone who knows me or who's been watching these videos for a little bit knows that I'm no trigger snob. However, I've got to say, this trigger's got to go, because I do not like that reset. I do not ever want to have to contemplate the idea that it's possible that I could come up in a gunfight, think I've hit reset, and get a dead trigger when I thought I was going to be sending a round downrange. That's not okay to me. That's not an acceptable result. Now, does that mean that this is on my short list of things that I need to upgrade? No. My short list is actually very short about things that have to change about this gun. But it's on my horizon for improvements. I've already checked. HK Parts does stock a competition grade trigger for the USP 45 Compact, and I'm going to be investing in one of those before too much longer. It's like $140, and I think it'll be $140 well spent. However, in the meanwhile, I do still plan on shooting this gun exactly how it is and forcing myself to train, because I think it's going to be a good habit builder to make sure that I'm hitting those resets properly, that I'm actually hitting those resets and not copping out and going to slapping the trigger. That's something that I want to make sure that I avoid. That's something I need to make sure that I work out that bad habit and not allow this one range session to just set the tone for a bad habit for a really long time until I can summon up the ability to break it. Unacceptable. I will keep this in its stock format until I feel that I've effectively kicked that habit and can run this gun just fine with its stock trigger, and then I'll upgrade it. Because, you know, treat yourself kind of deal. Alright guys, that's pretty much what I have for this range analysis. So if you'd like, I'll go ahead and run all that stuff, all those again at the end of the video without my commentary, so that you can kind of think about what I said and watch it in application. And if you see something that I didn't see or I didn't talk about, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. You know, I need as much input and data as I can to keep improving myself as a shooter. So until then, I guess Murph from 24 hours ago, Murph from this morning, and myself will see you later. Son of a bitch.